1972, one single pass. 8.99 seconds. The entire NHRA Pro Stock rulebook got ripped up and rewritten because of one man. Fans called him grumpy. NHRA officials whispered something much worse behind closed doors. Cheater. This is the story they tried to bury for 50 years. And after the next 10 minutes, you'll finally understand why they were terrified of Bill Jenkins. Who was Bill Jenkins really? December 22, 1930. Philadelphia. The country is still crawling out of the Great Depression. Most kids dream of baseball gloves or a new bicycle for Christmas. William Tyler Jenkins dreams of horsepower. By age 13, he's already dragging wrecked flathead V8s and Chevy Stovebolt 6s home on a little red wagon. Neighbors think he's crazy. His dad just shakes his head and builds him a bigger workbench in the garage. While other teenagers in the 1940s are jitterbugging and chasing girls, Bill is chasing compression ratios, port velocities, and sparkly curves with a flashlight under a blanket at night. He graduates high school with perfect grades in math and physics, then does something almost no gearhead of that era even thinks about. He gets accepted into Cornell University, an Ivy League school. Classmates wear blazers and boat shoes. Jenkins shows up in grease-stained khakis with a slide rule hanging off his belt like a pistol. While they're at frat parties, he's in the university machine shop until 4 a.m., building his own cam-grinding machine out of war surplus parts. He graduates in the early 1950s with a full mechanical engineering degree and one burning belief. Factory engineers are scared to push limits. I'm not. The 1950s explode. Drag racing is still half street, half airport runway. Bill shows up with a bone-stock-looking 55 Chevy 150 running a modified 235 inline-six. People laugh until he starts running low 12s on bias-ply tires. Then mid-11s. Then the laughing stops. 1963, Chevrolet comes knocking. They see what he's doing to small blocks and offer factory support. Jenkins hates corporate politics, but he takes the deal only on one condition: total control of the build. Out of a tiny shop in Malvern, Pennsylvania, Jenkins Competition Engineering is born. One lathe, one dyno, one angry genius who refuses to smile. 1965 becomes the year NHRA learns his name forever. February Pomona Winter Nationals. He rolls out the infamous Black Arrow, a black 1965 Plymouth Belvedere with a race-prepped factory Hemi. Super stock/automatic class. He doesn't just win, he obliterates the field. Runs numbers so fast that officials think he's running nitro. 6 months later, Indianapolis Nationals. He switches to a 1940 Willis gasser in A/modified production. Runs 11.11 at 130 plus mph. That's faster than half the top fuel cars of the era. The crowd is speechless. The officials start taking notes. But here's what separates Jenkins from every other hot shoe. Every other racer guesses. Jenkins calculates. He's the first to bring real data acquisition to the strip. Notebooks full of sparkly tables, valve-lash charts, tire growth formulas. He invents the cool can, ice water jacket, so engines stay at exact temperature between rounds. He pioneers gas-ported pistons, mushroom lifters, dry sump oiling. He treats drag racing like NASA treats rockets. Crew members start calling him grumpy because on race day he turns into a different species. No smiles. No small talk. No autographs. One legendary story from 1966. A little kid runs up after Jenkins wins the final, waving a hero card. Jenkins looks down and growls, "Kid, I'm trying to figure out why I only picked up .02 from yesterday. Go ask the guy who got runner-up. He's got time." That scowl. Those wraparound sunglasses. That voice like gravel. It becomes the most feared sight in pro stock pits. To the fans he's grumpy. To Detroit he's a walking nightmare. To NHRA, he's about to become the man who forces them to rewrite the entire sport, one band part at a time. The crime that started it all. The acid-dipping scandal. 1970, NHRA creates the brand new pro stock class. Factory hot rods, showroom bodies, big money from Detroit. Chevrolet hands Bill Jenkins a brand new Camaro and says, "Go beat Chrysler." Jenkins nods, disappears into his Malvern shop, and what comes out 6 weeks later makes grown men in NHRA tech inspection sweat. They called it Grumpy's toy. It looked like a regular 1970 Camaro. Same fenders. Same roofline. Same paint. But when they put it on the scales, something was very, very wrong. Factory Camaro, 3,580 pounds. Grumpy's toy, 3,280 pounds. 300 pounds missing. Gone. Vanished. That's like removing the entire engine and still having weight left over. Rumors exploded overnight. Jenkins is dipping the entire body in acid. He's got a secret tank behind the shop that eats steel like candy. He's shaving metal so thin you can see daylight through the quarter panels. NHRA officials descended on every race like FBI agents. After every round when they tore that Camaro apart, floor pans, roof, firewall, everything. They brought magnets, thickness gauges, flashlights. They measured every square inch looking for proof. They never found the acid tank. They never caught him red-handed. But they knew. Because no normal human removes 300 pounds from a unibody car without cutting it to pieces. And Grumpy's toy wasn't just light, it was evil fast. First pro stock in the 9.20s. Then 9.10s. Then low 9s on a 430 Ci big block while everyone else struggled to break 9.50. The final straw came at the 1971 Summer Nationals. Jenkins wins the event, does a massive burnout, parks in the winner's circle. NHRA's top tech inspector walks up with a brand new rulebook page still warm from the printer and slaps it on the windshield. New rule, effective immediately. No chemically altered or thinned body panels allowed in pro stock. The entire crowd goes silent. That rule had never existed before. It was written for one car. One man. Grumpy's toy. Jenkins climbs out, looks at the new rule, then looks at the official and says the sentence that became legend. Took you long enough. He never confirmed the acid dipping. He never denied it either. To this day, old crew members just smile and say, "We plead the fifth." But the damage was done. NHRA had fired the first shot in a war that would last half a decade. They declared war on creativity. Bill Jenkins declared war right back. And the next weapon he built wouldn't just bend the rules. It would make the entire concept of stock body obsolete forever. The 1972 Vega that broke NHRA forever. 1972, the war is on. After the acid-dipped Camaro fiasco, NHRA thinks they've finally boxed Jenkins in. They changed the weight brakes to favor big block moppers. Sox and Martin, Dick Landy, and the Chrysler boys are now 300 to 400 pounds lighter than small block Chevys. They think Grumpy is finished. Bill Jenkins disappears into his shop for 4 months. No interviews. No testing. Nothing. Then he rolls the gates open, and the entire sport loses its mind. It's a 1972 Chevy Vega. Candy apple red. Stock looking. Tiny 15-inch front tires. The crowd laughs. Chrysler guys are literally pointing and laughing in the pits. Then the time slips come. Qualifying, 9.90 at 142 mph. 17th on the sheet. Everyone relaxes. Grumpy's done. Race day. First round, 9.67. Second round, 9.58. Third round, 9.44. Final round, 9.33 at 146 miles per hour. First pro stock in the 9.30s. First small block to ever do it. He wins the Winter Nationals, starting 17th. NHRA officials go pale. They tear that Vega apart for 6 straight hours in the tech barn. They measure wheelbase. They weigh it. They pull the body off the chassis. They find nothing illegal. Because Jenkins just built the first real tube chassis pro stock car, hidden inside a perfect-looking Vega body. Relocated rear axle. Dana 60. Lenco 4-speed. Strut front suspension. The body was still steel, but everything that mattered had been moved, reinforced, and lightened to perfection. The next week, NHRA releases another emergency rule. All body components must remain in factory location. No relocated suspension pickup points. Translation, we just got embarrassed on national television, and we're mad. Jenkins reads the new rule, shrugs, and says the most savage line in drag racing history. Fine. You want factory location? I'll give you factory location, and still run 8s. 2 months later, he comes back with Grumpy's toy 2 Vega. Still look stock. Still factory locations. But now it's running high 8s. 8.99 at 150 miles per hour. First pro stock in the 8-second zone. The crowd loses their minds. Officials lose their minds worse. NHRA has no choice. They kill the entire idea of stock-appearing bodies. By 1974, every single pro stock car in the world is a tube chassis, back half, funny car-caged monster wearing a thin fiberglass shell. Bill Jenkins didn't just win a race. He single-handedly ended the factory hot rod era and started the modern pro stock era. And he did it with a $10,000 Vega while Chrysler was spending millions. That red Vega didn't just beat the competition. It beat the rulemakers. It beat Detroit. It beat common sense. And then they never forgave him for it. Every rule NHRA wrote because of one man. By the end of 1972, NHRA's rulebook looked like it had been through a war. Pages added. Pages crossed out. Emergency faxes flying to every track in America. And on every single new page, one name was written between the lines: Bill Jenkins. Here are just some of the rules that exist today only because Grumpy made officials look stupid. The kick-out oil pan ban of 1973. Jenkins invented the first kick-out pan that held extra oil on the right side during hard launches. Result? Zero oil starvation at 9,000 revolutions per minute. Everyone copied it overnight. NHRA's response: banned for 1 year, then quietly allowed it again when they realized the entire field was now faster than top fuel had been 5 years earlier. The dry sump oiling ban, 1973 to 1974. Jenkins ran the first dry sump system in pro stock. Remote oil tank, vacuum pumps, no windage losses. He picked up 40 horsepower just from oil control. NHRA banned it immediately. 6 months later they unbanned it because every single top team threatened to boycott if they couldn't use it. The stock wheelbase plus or minus 1 inch rule. Grumpy moved the rear axle forward almost 3 inches inside the Vega wheel well. Looked stock from 10 feet away. Completely changed weight transfer. NHRA measured every car with templates for the next decade because of that one red Vega. The no relocated suspension pickup points rule. Written the Monday after the 1972 Winter Nationals. Still in the rulebook today, word for word, because Jenkins proved you could build a back half car inside a factory-looking body and nobody could catch you. Mandatory teardowns after every final round. Started in 1973. Reason? Officials got tired of tearing apart only Jenkins' car and finding nothing. So they decided to punish everybody. The 2,350 pounds minimum weight for small blocks. Added after Jenkins kept winning with cars that weighed 2,180 to 2,200 pounds. They literally added 150 pounds of ballast to slow him down, and he still won. The cool can controversy. Jenkins rolled ice water jackets on wheels to every round. Engine temp never moved more than 2 degrees. Other teams were 50 to 80 degrees hotter by the finals. NHRA tried to ban cool cans in 1974. Every driver said they'd strike. Ban lasted exactly one national event. The strut-style front suspension rule. Jenkins invented the modern pro stock strut setup in 1973. NHRA tried to outlaw it as not factory design. It's been mandatory ever since. The gas-ported piston, tech nightmare. Officials couldn't figure out how his engines made 50 more horsepower than factory blueprints. Answer: vertical gas ports in the pistons. They made a new rule requiring piston inspection holes in the block, just to check for Jenkins tricks. The famous Grumpy rule nobody talks about. After 1974, any major rules vote required a 30-day notice instead of overnight changes. But because NHRA got embarrassed too many times changing rules in the middle of a season just to stop one guy. By 1975, the pro stock rulebook had tripled in size. And 90% of the new pages had one thing in common. They were reactions to whatever Bill Jenkins had done the previous weekend. He didn't break the rules. He exposed them. He proved that factory stock was a lie told by scared engineers. And every time NHRA wrote a new rule to stop him, he just found another way to be faster, lighter, smarter. They never caught him cheating once. Not a single disqualification in his entire career. But they wrote more rules because of him than because of every other team combined. That's not cheating. That's genius they couldn't control. The day they finally beat him. Or did they? 1975, Indianapolis, the U.S. Nationals, the Super Bowl of drag racing, and Bill Jenkins, now 44, 13 national event wins in his pocket, rolls up in the final version of Grumpy's toy, still that same red Vega that had been haunting NHRA's nightmares for 4 straight years, but this time something feels different. The rulebook has grown fatter than the Bible. 200 extra pounds of minimum weight slapped on small blocks. Cylinder heads now have to be flow tested on a Tuesday in Detroit under factory supervision. Cars impounded for 2 days after every semifinal, and every single change has one target painted on it. The guy in the sunglasses who refuses to smile, All weekend he's still #1 qualifier, still cutting low 8.70s like it's easy. But in the final against a young Bob Glidden in a factory Ford Pinto, the light goes green, and for the first time in a decade Jenkins gets left at the tree by 0.02 of a second. The crowd is stunned into silence, reporters swarm the lane, expecting the usual stone-faced walk-off, but this time Grumpy grabs the microphone himself and drops the bomb that ends an era. "I'm done. I'm tired of racing tech inspectors and tape measures instead of race cars. If NHRA wants a class where the guy with the most lawyers and the biggest factory checkbook wins, they can have it. I came here to go fast, not to argue about where my damn rear axle is mounted. So congratulations, you finally beat me. Enjoy your parade." He tosses the mic, climbs into his tow truck, and disappears down Georgetown Road while half the grandstand is still trying to process what just happened. Newspapers the next day scream, NHRA finally stops Grumpy. And officials pop champagne in the tower, but the joke is on them because within 24 months every single pro stock team in the world is running Jenkins strut suspensions, Jenkins dry sump systems, Jenkins cool cans, Jenkins oil pans, Jenkins shift linkages, Jenkins everything, and Bob Glidden himself, the guy who beat him, will later admit on record, "Everything I ever learned about making a pro stock car fast I stole by staring at Grumpy's cars in the pits for 5 years." By 1980, NHRA quietly deletes half the anti-Jenkins rules because without his constant pressure the class has gone stale, lap times flatline, crowds shrink, and suddenly the same officials who celebrated his retirement are begging him to come back and save the category he invented. He never drives again, never takes another factory dollar, just stays in that little Malvern shop building engines for whoever can pay, painting them Chevy orange, and shipping them out with a handwritten note, "Run what you brung and hope you brung enough." When he dies in 2012, NHRA's official statement calls him the father of modern pro R stock, which in plain English means, "We spent 10 years trying to kill the monster we created, we failed, and every single thing you love about this class today is his fingerprint." They didn't beat Grumpy, they just made him walk away, and the second he did the entire sport realized it had cut off its own oxygen supply. The myths versus the truth. Did he ever actually cheat? So let's settle the one question every keyboard warrior still screams in the comments 50 years later. Did Bill Grumpy Jenkins ever actually cheat, or was he just the smartest man to ever turn a wrench? Here's the cold, hard truth nobody wants to say out loud. In his entire professional career, from 1961 to 1975, Bill Jenkins was never once disqualified, never once thrown out of an event, never once had a win taken away, never once failed post-race tech, not a single time, zero, nada. While every other legend of that era, Sox and Martin, Dino Don, Big John Mazmanian, hell even some top fuel guys, ate at least one DQ or red light for something shady, Grumpy sailed through every single teardown. With officials crawling through his cars like ants and finding nothing, no hidden switches, no traction control prototypes, no nitrous bottles, no illegal bore spacing, nothing, and that's exactly why NHRA hated him the most. Because they tore those cars apart for hours, sometimes days, with factory reps watching, and every single time the scale read legal, the cube checked out, the templates fit, the heads flowed within spec, and the only thing they ever found was that Bill Jenkins was simply better at reading the same rulebook they wrote. The acid-dipping story? Never proven, the tank was never found, the body shop guys who supposedly did it took the secret to their graves, and Jenkins would just smirk and say, "Show me the rule that says I can't." The relocated axle in the Vega? Within the plus or minus 2% wheelbase tolerance until they changed it the next week because of him. The dry sump, the cool cans, the gas-ported pistons, every single trick was protested, measured, argued over, and finally made legal because when you're the fastest and still past tech, the only option left is to move the goalposts. Old NHRA tech director Buster Couch admitted in a 1995 interview, "We hated tearing down Grumpy's stuff because we knew we'd find nothing and still have to write a new rule Monday morning." Even Bob Glidden, the man who took his crown, said flat out, "Bill didn't cheat, he just worked harder and thought deeper than the rest of us, and that made us all look lazy." The real cheating wasn't in Jenkins' shop, it was in the NHRA offices when they faxed emergency rule changes at 2 a.m. just to slow one guy down. He never needed to break the rules because he was busy breaking physics while staying one paragraph ahead of the book. So when people call him a cheater today, they're really just admitting they're mad that a guy with a slide rule, a bad attitude, and a tiny shop in Pennsylvania out-engineered the combined might of General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford, without ever giving them the satisfaction of catching him. Grumpy didn't cheat, he simply refused to lose, and the only way they stopped him was when he decided their game wasn't worth playing anymore. The secret comeback nobody talks about. Everyone thinks the story ends in 1975 when Grumpy tosses the mic and drives off into the sunset, but that's the Disney version. The real story, the one old crew guys only whisper after a few beers, is that Bill Jenkins never actually left. He just went underground and pulled off the most savage revenge in drag racing history. From 1976 onward he stops driving, shuts the doors to photographers, paints over the windows of the Malvern shop, and turns Jenkins' competition into a Black Ops engine program that supplies half the pro stock grid while pretending to be retired. No factory stickers, no press releases, no sponsorship decals, just plain Chevy orange small blocks and big blocks showing up in other people's trailers with a plain white envelope that says, "Do not open until you're on the property." Between 1977 and 1990 those mystery engines win 5 NHRA Pro Stock Championships and over 60 national events for drivers like Warren Johnson, Bob Glidden, yes, the same guy who beat him, Lee Shepard, and Joe Lepone, and nobody outside a tiny circle ever knows they're breathing Grumpy's air until years later. He develops the first symmetrical port Pro Stock heads in 1982 that add 80 horsepower overnight, ships them out coded WJ1, so Warren thinks they're his own design. He invents the modern raised cam big block layout in 1985 that still wins races in 2025. But the credit goes to Rear Morrison. He pioneers vacuum pump technology and billet cranks while NHRA is busy writing rules against him personally, and every time one of his engines wins a championship the officials scratch their heads because the driver swears it's just a factory crate motor. By the late 80s he's making more money selling $35,000 engines than he ever made driving, and he does it all while the sport still believes he's sitting at home watching TV. The ultimate middle finger comes in 1989 when Warren Johnson, running Jenkins heads, cam, and block, wins the championship and NHRA hands him the trophy on the exact same podium where Grumpy walked away 14 years earlier. WJ hugs the trophy, crowd cheers, and somewhere in Pennsylvania a guy with sunglasses and zero smile opens a beer and says absolutely nothing, because he doesn't need to. The scoreboard already spoke, even after he officially retires for good in the 2000s. His last-gen parts are still winning races in Mountain Motor Pro Stock 20 years later, and every single modern 500-inch Pro Stock engine is just a love letter to a guy who quit driving because he got bored of embarrassing people in public. So when historians say Bill Jenkins retired in 1975, they're technically correct about the driving part, but the truth is he simply moved the war from the starting line to the dyno room. And from 1976 until the day he died he kept winning world championships without ever putting on a fire suit again. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how a real legend gets the last laugh. Section 9. The Final Days and the Phone Call NHRA Never Forgave. March 29, 2012, Powley, Pennsylvania, and the man who once made an entire sport rewrite its rules every Monday morning dies quietly in a hospital bed at 81 years old. No cameras, no press, just family and a few old crew guys who still call him boss, even though he hasn't barked an order in years. The official cause is heart failure, but the real cause is 50 years of running at 10,000 revolutions per minute with no clutch, 50 years of carrying an entire class on his back while pretending he didn't care. When the news hits the internet, the drag racing world stops dead. Facebook timelines turn black and orange, grown men who saw him race in the 70s cry in their garages, and NHRA releases a polite 2-paragraph statement that somehow forgets to mention they spent a decade trying to outlaw the man they're now calling the father of pro stock. But the real story, the one that still makes old NHRA officials turn red, happened exactly 1 year before he died. In 2011, when a 79-year-old Bill Jenkins, frail, oxygen tank beside the recliner, gets a phone call from the current NHRA tech director asking for help because pro stock lap times have flatlined for 5 straight years and the new 500-inch engines are making 1,400 horsepower but nobody can figure out how to make them live past 200 feet. The tech director basically begs the old enemy to consult, to come look at the new heads, to tell them why the vacuum is wrong, why the ring flutter is killing cranks, why the entire class is stuck. And according to 3 people who were in the room, Grumpy listens for 90 silent seconds, then speaks the last legendary sentence of his life. "You boys spent 10 years telling me I didn't know what I was doing, now you want me to save the class I invented after you killed it? Tell you what, send me the dyno sheets and a check for what you paid your last consultant, and maybe I'll think about it." He hangs up, turns to his wife and says, "They finally admitted it," and laughs for the first time in public in 40 years. The check never gets sent, the call is never returned, and 12 months later he's gone, taking the last secrets with him, because Bill Jenkins never gave away knowledge for free and he sure as hell wasn't starting at 79 for the same people. who tried to ban him when he was 39. At the memorial service, Warren Johnson stands up with tears in his eyes and says, "Every championship I ever won, I owe to that man, and I never got to say thank you to his face." Bob Glidden sends flowers with a card that just reads, "You were right about everything. Rest easy, boss." And somewhere in the back row, an old NHRA official who wrote half those emergency rules in the 70s stares at the floor knowing he just lost the war for the final time. Bill Jenkins entered the sport as a kid with a slide rule, terrorized it as a genius with a scowl, retired as a legend, and died as the only man who ever beat NHRA at their own game and then refused to help them fix the mess they made. They called him grumpy, they called him a cheat, but in the end even his enemies had to call him sir. So here's the verdict: straight, no chaser. Bill Grumpy Jenkins never cheated, he just refused to be average in a sport that punished excellence. He took a slide rule, a bad attitude, and a $10,000 Vega and forced General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, and the entire NHRA rulebook to kneel. They wrote hundreds of pages trying to stop one man and still couldn't catch him once. Every modern pro stock car that launches at 1.60 foots, every 1,400 horse mountain motor, every strut front end and dry sump system is just a copy of homework Grumpy did in 1973 while everyone else was crying for new rules. He quit driving because he got bored of winning against children, then spent 40 years winning championships from a phone in Pennsylvania while the same officials who called him a cheat begged him to save the class he invented. He died undefeated, unforgiving, and still the fastest mind drag racing ever saw. So when someone today calls him a cheater, just laugh, because the only thing Bill Jenkins ever cheated was mediocrity, and he did it legally every single time. Was Grumpy the biggest villain in NHRA history, or the hero who saved pro stock by breaking it first? Drop your answer below, cheater or genius. Like if Grumpy is your hero. Subscribe to Regal Rides and smash that bell, because next video we're exposing the swamp rat NHRA actually burned the evidence for Don Garlett's band 300 miles per hour monster. This one's for you, boss. Rest easy. You already won. Regal Rides.